All right, well, it's about that time, so we're going to go ahead and get things started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining this month's consulting webinar. My name is Stephen Krutzfeldt, and I'm a business process consultant here with CDI. Today, we're going to be talking about maintaining SQL by using workflows. So if you joined us last month's webinar was about how we can use SQL databases to create dynamic fields. And today's webinar is going to be piggybacking off that and showing you how you can actually maintain some of those tables. If this is your first build-along, what exactly is a build-along? In short, a build-along is an interactive experience designed to guide the viewer through the creation and deployment of a common business process. What that means for you is that if you're actually following along, or if you're going back and reviewing the video, by the end of this session, you should have a better understanding of how you can actually build this in-house and deploy it and use it internally. If at any point you have any questions or need help, please utilize the chat box or the chat window on the floating window on GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar here. I'll be monitoring those periodically, and at the end we'll have some time set aside to answer any questions that you may have. Now, to get the most out of today's webinar, please, first of all, take good notes. Personally, I like to take a lot of screenshots as we go through things. I find them much more helpful to remind myself where we're at and all things that are happening. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions. Chances are, if you have the question, you're not the only one. There's somebody else who has the same question, so don't be afraid to ask. There will be a survey afterwards, so please fill that out. We do take all of your feedback seriously and use that to come up with ideas for the next month's webinars and how we can better serve our user community. And note that this will be recorded as well. So if you feel like we went a little bit quick or you didn't catch something, this will be available on the CDI YouTube channel, and you can access that at any time and go at your own pace. Also note that individual sessions are available. So if you found today's webinar helpful, but you want to expand on that, by all means, reach out to our team and we'd be happy to set you up with somebody. So today's process is going to be maintaining SQL with workflow. The intended audience for this webinar is going to be the more advanced users, the Laserfiche administrators, and also possibly the database administrators. We're going to make sure during today's you're going to need access to the workflow design tool, Laserfiche client, and also SQL Management Studio. Not listed here, we'll be touching on the administration console as well. So I would advise you to have that open and available also. That's going to feed right in to making sure that your dynamic templates are being updated, and so we may need to access that also. So why are we doing this? Why would someone need to know how to maintain SQL tables with workflow? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First off, not all of your users may have the ability, the know-how, or the access to update records in SQL directly. Also, SQL tables are only as valuable as the data in them. It's like any other table or record. If you want it to be up to date and you want to have the most recent data and records to reference, someone needs to be maintaining that and making sure that it is kept up to date. And also, by automating this process and ensuring that everything is up to date, that makes sure that there's less opportunity for error and for double entry or anything else. So by automating that process, we actually take a lot of the risk out of updating those. So for today's agenda, we're actually going to be creating 3 different workflows that will help you maintain your SQL database. I do want to add the caveat that this is just one way that we can use the workflow activities that update this data. There will be multiples, so I'm just going to give you 3 examples, but that does not mean that this is the only way to do things. It's not black and white. So the first one we're going to do is show how we can create a new record, how to add a new row to a SQL table by using workflow. We'll also then show you how you can take an existing record, an existing row in workflow or in SQL, and then use workflow to update that record. So find that record and put in the new up-to-date information. And lastly, I'll show you how, if we get to the point where the table just is not accurately reflecting the original source of truth, whether that be something like a CRM or in the example we're going to be using today, If you have a folder structure of all your, let's say, employees, and the table no longer reflects that, we'll show you how you can update that entire table by wiping it out and rewriting it with the new up-to-date data. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into Laserfiche. So as I mentioned before, we're going to be looking at Laserfiche, as well as the admin console, workflow design tool, and SQL Management Studio. Now, it's just a quick reminder of what we looked at last month and why we're talking about this today. We created a couple of different templates, and we made sure that those fields were dynamic. And when I say that they're dynamic, I'm referring to the ability to have the field values change based on what you select beforehand. So if we look at Office document, for example, is one I created today. If we're adding a document, we're going to want to be able to select the category that will then change based on the category we select. And then also, if we select our user, some of you might recognize these names from the show The Office. You'll notice it automatically filled out everything else without me having to select it. We have last name, department, position, and everything else. That's because it's reading back to a SQL table. More specifically, I'm using the Office Lite table here in my database. So if we open this up, we'll see exactly where all that information is coming from. And so what we've done is in the admin console, when we created those templates, we first made sure that our external table was registered. So we can see Office Lite here was registered as an external table. And then the template itself, if we were to go into the Office document that we just looked at, we can see under the Dynamic Fields tab that each one of these is linked to the Office Lite table that we had registered here. So that's kind of what we covered last month. If you are lost already, I would reference you to that video to get caught up to speed, and then you can apply this a little more easily. So today, what we're going to look at is how are we going to make sure that that information that's in this table is up to date? Because we all know that employees are going to come and go over as the years go by. Positions are going to change, supervisors are going to be swapped out. So how can we make it easier to keep this table up to date without having to log into SQL Management Studio, add a new row, and fill in all this information manually? Well, that all begins with the Workflow Design Studio. So we're going to go in here and create a new workflow. And the first thing that we always want to do, it's best practice to make sure that you give your workflow a name that'll tell other users what it's going to do. So in this case, we'll just call it SQL Update. And you can give it a description, and then make sure that you're connecting to the correct repository. I have all this information saved. We're going to be working out of the financial database. It's all in here. We can validate it to see that it is, in fact, connecting correctly. So once all of that is connected, then we can go ahead and start building this out. Now, before you start building a workflow, you also need to kind of think through what it is we're going to try to accomplish. What is the end goal of the workflow, and what are some of the steps that are going to need to be taken in order to ensure that all the data is collected and then also distributed to the correct areas? So the scenario I'm going to paint today, as I kind of alluded to, is that we want to make sure that if we were to add a new employee to our Dunder Mifflin group here, so we're in the Dunder Mifflin root folder, we want to make sure that that employee, if they have their new folder, is then going to be added to the SQL table. So that way we can use our dynamic fields we looked at earlier, so we can actually start saving documents to their folder once it's created without having to go in. So that's the scenario that we're going to work with, and that's going to be the first one for new employee. So if we go into our workflow design tool, the first thing we're going to need to do is retrieve the field values of what we are collecting. And another thing I can kind of show you in the way that I'm doing this today, and there are multiple ways of doing this, but I have a specific template I'm using for when a new employee is being created. And what that's going to do is just give me basically the ability for any one of my users to give a new employee first name, last name, department, supervisor, and position all within one area. So what we're going to do is tell the workflow to grab this information and then apply it to the last name, to the permanent template, and then also update our table. Another option would be to, of course, use an existing template that you're already using and do a query to see if it's new or not, and do it that way. But so this is just one way that you can build this out. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to assume that the template that's assigned is going to be the new employee template. So we'll want to go ahead and grab all of those fields. And if you were following how I did that, I just selected the fields here, selected my template, and then just grabbed all. So now we're going to have the information of the first name, last name, department, and everything else for our new employee. Once we add that, it's really easy to get it into SQL. There's a workflow activity literally called insert data. So if you use the toolbox search, find insert data, we bring that over here. This is configured in such a way that it can then, we're now in the position to write to that SQL table. First thing we're going to do is update our activity name. This will help others that come in behind us to know what the activity is actually doing. So we're going to add employee to SQL. Now with your data source, if you've never used this before, it may not be configured. I have mine looking at my Laserfiche external tables, but let's go ahead and take a look at how we would manage that. So in the data source, we'll go ahead and go into manage data sources. And if we are in fact, we'll go ahead and add a new one, of course, too. And if we are in fact using SQL, which is what I would recommend, that is a direct connection. And we're just going to name this the demo. So make sure you have the direct connection wizard type selected. We can go to next. This dropdown will also, again, select direct. And the data source driver is going to be SQL. Now for the server name, you will of course have to be able to have access to this, or at least in order to set this all up. And the way you can find that server name is by going into SQL itself. It may say localhost over here, but we also have some login information down here that we want to copy from. And so that is actually our local host right there. And it's /Laserfiche. So what I'm going to be doing is copying this, going into the workflow design tool, adding that information, /Laserfiche, and then we have the name of our server. Now the database is going to be referring to these databases here. So if you expand database and you find where your external table is located, it's going to be the actual database that it's associated with, in which case here it's LF external tables. Now, if you do have a Windows authentication set up, you can use that. Otherwise, you'll need a username and password that can actually get you into SQL. So this is where you would enter that in. So if everything is correct, we should be able to test that and see that we've successfully connected to the database source. If you don't see that, then I would recommend going back in and reconfiguring it and figuring out where you went wrong. Probably a username or password if you run into that, but you can certainly work with your IT group or whoever your database administrator is to figure that out. So once we have that, we can select our data source and what our connection is, and then that will be able to look into and hopefully give you a short list of the different tables that you can pull from. So as you can see here, my Office Lite table that I was working with before is now an option. So once we've selected our data source and our data that we're going to insert, we now have to tell it, what are we going to be writing to SQL? What are we going to be writing to this table? And that's where our retrieve field values come in, that we want to make sure that we have first name, last name, department, position, and supervisor. And I may just select ID, but let that populate automatically by the create identity token. So first name, we're going to use the token selector here. It's going to be the retrieve field values. First name, last name is going to be retrieve field value, last name, department, and so on down the line. Just like that. So now if we were to run this right now, we could create a new folder with that new employee template, fill in that information, and that would take it directly from Laserfiche and write it to SQL. But I want to go just a step further, because that would mean that employee folder is always then going to have that new employee metadata assigned to it, which isn't exactly what I want for them. I want it to make sure that they all have the uniform, they all have the exact same template assigned to them. So I'm going to use the assign field values activity, and I'm going to use this to assign a different template to the folder than the one that we give it. And we're just going to call this assign office folder template. And so since we're assigning a new one, we will need to use the radio button to tell it, yes, we're assigning a new template. And we'll use the office folder one. And we also want to go ahead and remove the fields from the old one as well. It's then going to ask, well, what fields do you want? And what do you want them to be populated with? So once again, we're going to select our template, office folder, select all, okay. And we'll want to make sure that we are, again, assigning the values from our original retrieve field values for department, first name, last name, so on down the line. So this will ensure that it's then updated. Another thing I really like to do also is I will rename the entry at the end. It may just rewrite it with the exact same entry that's already there, but oftentimes I've noticed that there may be just one letter that's off, and if that's the case, then as you start automatically filing documents to this new location, it may create a new one because of that spelling error. And so just to be safe, I always want to update the name. So in this case, you'll notice if we go back to Laserfiche, that all of my folders are named first name space last name. It should be really easy to fill that in, but just in case, I always add that in to show update folder name, make sure that it is in fact first name space and then last name. So we're retrieving the field values of the new employee template, writing that to SQL, assigning the last name template that's going to always reside on the folder of the employee, and then updating the name. And if we want, we can go ahead and throw in a track tokens as well, so that way if there are any errors, we'll be able to nail them down a little bit easier. Then we can publish. It'll prompt us for our starting rules, and so we'll have to make sure that we give it some rules that will be specific to this. It's also always best practice to name it accordingly, so you know if it's a change rule or if it's a create rule or what have you. And then I always like to include the name of the workflow also. So we're going to make this is a condition. We're not going to schedule it. We're going to make it so it runs when certain conditions are met. The entry type is going to be on a folder today. The path is going to be in our Dunder Mifflin folder path. So we'll want to make sure that the entry path includes this. I also want to make sure I change this to changed, that we're going to run this on changed entries. You may or may not know that when you create a new document, it'll automatically prompt you to assign the template or metadata. But in this case, it's a folder, and so when you create a folder, it does not automatically prompt you for that. So it's going to run on when the folder changes, not when the folder is created. But there's really nothing stopping you from creating a workflow that says when you create a new document, and it automatically prompts you for that, have a template specific to new department or new employee or new what have you, whatever you want to write to your SQL table, and do it that way as well. So folder, path, we could say that it has to be a change to the specific template, the new employee template, but I'm actually going to expand on this a little bit later, so I'm going to leave this open for now. But normally I would say if it's a new employee template and there's a change to that, that's what we want to make sure that this runs on. The more detailed you can make this so it doesn't interfere with other workflows, the better. And one thing we absolutely never forget is the user does not equal workflow, that we don't want this running automatically and we don't want to get into a workflow loop. So if we go ahead and publish this and finish, what we should be able to see then is if we go into Laserfiche and we create a new folder, and I'm going to hire myself at Dunder Mifflin. Wouldn't that be fun? And I'm going to assign metadata. The metadata is going to be the new employee template, because that's what we wrote this on. And I'm going to go ahead and add my middle name here as well. Don't laugh. Department is going to be, we'll say I'm going to work in accounting with Oscar and Kevin. And my supervisor is Michael Scott. Okay. So we should see this run, and we should see this then write to the database here. If we execute this again, office lights, we'll go ahead and close this out. Although I didn't see the change, so let's go ahead and check our workflows. Sorry. So it didn't write, and we can see our messages. Not insert explicit value for identity column and table when identity insert is off. So that's something that we need to definitely look out for. So we can go ahead and take off the ID column and try publishing again, and we'll see if that worked. Set to run when it changes, we'll change it. Hopefully that'll give us a little better results. There we go. So now we see Stephen D. Krutzfeldt, that it renamed it based on the information we gave it. And then if we go into our SQL table, we should be able to select the top 1,000 rows and see that Stephen was then written to the SQL table automatically. So what that means then is, since we have dynamic templates, if we want to go into our incoming scans, for example, where we normally file our employee documents, we can create a new document and assign the office document template. It's going to be an HR, because I'm a new hire, so this will be a pre-hire file. And we'll see Stephen D is down here. It'll automatically fill in all my information because it's reading from that. So as quickly as you add that, it's written to the table and your fields are automatically dynamic, just like that. So you can start filing, and since we also had it rename the folder as well, we know that it's going to go to the correct place every time, so everything gets filed correctly. So that's how you would add a new record to a table pretty easily. Now, what if we want to change a record? Once again, it's going to begin by how your templates are set up. I will tell you right now that the Office folder that we're working with, I have these 3 fields dynamic, and actually, I guess I have all of them set up to be dynamic. What that means is that we wouldn't be able to necessarily change the first name or the last name of the individual. We want to make sure that that's how we're identifying the row we're going to change. So it makes sense to have it so you can actually change or write in a new last name or something like that. But how you set up your templates is going to be a big factor in what you're able to make changes on. So just be aware of that and just think of that when you're writing the workflows. But what I'm going to do is assume that no one's name is going to change in the employee roster. However, their job title, position, and department can change. And since we already have this workflow being set up so it runs when changes are made, we're just going to go ahead and keep the starting rules, but we're going to add a different branch. So if we go to our toolbox, the first thing we're going to do is create a conditional decision. So I'm going to search by conditional, sequence, routing, conditional decision. Now I'm going to put it right at the top because we're actually going to be using a different retrieve field value template as well. So best practice, always make sure that you rename your activities. And this is going to be new or existing. We'll call the first branch new. And the condition is going to be the template that we're using. So in this case, entry template name. If it equals the new employee one that we just created, then it'll go down this path. We'll just move all of that up there. And what I did there is I just hit Control and then selected multiple and then just dragged everything up into the new branch. And the existing is going to be set on the precursor that there is the permanent employee folder template already assigned, then we're making changes to that. So entry template name is going to equal our employee or office folder rather. So if it equals that, then it's going to go down this branch. Now it's going to start out pretty similar, that we want to, of course, see what changed, in which case we'll have to retrieve the field values. We'll call this RFB office folder. And we're going to go ahead and make sure that we select our template as office folder, and we're just going to grab all of the information. Make sure it's on the starting entry. Good. Now, the big change here and the big difference between our first branch is that we're not adding a new row to the table. We want to identify an existing row and then update it and add new information to the row that's already there. So in order to do that, let's do, is it update? Update data. So the activity you're looking for is update data. So we can drag that in here. And once again, you're going to have that same information. Configure source. We have our LF external tables already created there. If the connection is good, then you'll also be able to see your rows to update, or at least your table anyway, as an option here in the dropdown. So we want Office Light. And now it's going to ask us which rows we want to update. And this is important because what it's going to do is actually do a query to SQL to find that row based on the criteria you give it here. So this is going to have to be something that's relatively static, that's not going to change. Oftentimes, if we're doing a lot of these types of workflows, it's for something like a CRM where there's a specific like Salesforce ID or a Redtail ID, something like that. So in here, we're going to make sure that it's identifying it based on first name and last name, that's going to be our static information in this scenario. So it's going to query first name by the retrieve field value of first name, and it's going to query last name by the retrieve field value of last name. So once it identifies that row, then it's going to then update it. And basically what we want to say is there's going to be changes to either department, position, or supervisor. And it's going to retrieve all that information, and anything that's different will change, anything that's the same will not change, because it's just going to fill it in with the information we have here. So department, position, and supervisor. So supervisor value is going to be retrieve field value, supervisor. Okay, great. And that's really all we have to do at this point, because we're not looking to assign a different template. It already has the template we want. We don't need to rename it because it's already been named something that's consistent with everything else. So at this point, we can go ahead and publish it. We also don't need to change the starting rule because it's already running whenever something in that folder structure is changed. So let's go ahead and see if we can't change Stephen Krutzfeldt's information now. So we'll go into his metadata, and maybe accounting was fun for a little while, but I've been promoted to management, and I'm now regional manager, no longer reporting to Michael Scott, but rather David Wallace. So we should be able to then see that change. And if we go into here and just go ahead and execute that, also hitting F5 will refresh this. We can now see that Stephen D. Krutzfeldt in the table is now management, regional manager reporting to David Wallace. And even better, if we were to go ahead and create a new document and use our office document that's tied to everything, maybe payroll is going to change. All of that is automatically populating already with the new management, regional manager, David Wallace, everything. So we can create that, and you'll see it's also finding my folder and adding new subfolders based on our autofile rules. So that's how we can create a workflow that will add values directly to SQL and then also update the values. So the value here is that if you do have a roster or a list of different departments or any other information that you keep in a table and you want to be able to add information, you can do that directly from Laserfiche. We just have to create the workflows that do that. Caveat, of course, being that when you do set that up, you will, of course, need to have access to the tables that you want to update and everything else there. Now, the last thing I want to show you is that what if you get to the point where your list of employees is very, very different now from what the actual SQL table is. So you're at the point now where you're trying to file things, but they're just not in there, and there's a lot of additional employees that don't even work there anymore, and you're not sure how to go in and take them out. Well, we can create a workflow or a business process that can basically go in there, wipe out the table you have, and just rewrite it based on that information. Now, this is a little, you have to be careful with it, I guess is what I'll say. That it is going to delete the table. It's not going to completely get rid of the table, but it's going to delete all the values in this. So if you're comfortable with that and it's something that you know that you'll be able to write back to each time, or if you have it backed up somewhere, then it's a really good way to clean the data up, basically doing I call it the etch-a-sketch change to your data. You just shake it all and put it all back. So we're going to just call this delete table. Or you know what? It's a little ominous. Let's do rewrite table. Once again, our connection profile, make sure that we have one for LF Business, or LF Financial rather. And this one's pretty simple. So you think about how you would write the command to clear a table here. And that's what we're actually going to do as the first step here. There's a way, or there's an activity simply called custom query. It allows you to basically take the command, the SQL command, and write it in directly the same way you would in SQL, but in the workflow activity. So we're going to call this one clear table to give it a name. The data source is going to be LF external tables again. It's really nice once you get this populated, then you can just go in and drop it down very quick. And the query that we need is going to be to delete that specific table. Now, if you're like me and you know a little bit about SQL, but you're not great at just pounding out different commands and things like that, you can actually go in and test it here and then copy and paste. So I know that in order to do this, I need to first make sure that I select top 1,000 rows, which will write the whole query for me pretty much. But I don't need the specific columns here. What I need, though, is this information down here, the LF external tables.dbo.office light. And instead of selecting, we want to delete. And so I can actually take all that out and write delete and just copy this information. And that's going to be the command I need. And that's going to wipe out, not the columns, as we're not going to truncate this, but we are going to go ahead and take out all the values here. So we'll go in and we'll just paste that and hit OK. Next thing we want to do is point the workflow to our single source of truth, is what I would call it. That where is the clean data at? So this would be, if you're using Salesforce to rewrite that table, you would want to point it at the Salesforce records. But in this case, my single source of truth is I have a folder for each one of my employees. I know this is up to date. So I want to do a search, and I'll do an advanced search here, where I want to get all the folders that are within the Dunder Mifflin root folder and I want to make sure that the search syntax is being added here as well. So if I hit search, it's going to automatically populate that syntax for me. So rather than trying to write this out, I can just copy that as well. So copy the search syntax, go back to workflow, use our search repository activity, paste it into the search query, and if you test that, we should see it come back with like 17, or in this case, 19 entries. So that's how we know it worked correctly. So we're going to clear the table by using that query. We're then going to search the repository for all of our employee folders, and then for each entry, i.e. each entry found from our search repository, we want to do another activity, which in this case, it's going to be, first of all, once again, retrieve field values. It's our favorite activity. We want to make sure that we have all the updated information that resides on each one of those folders. And since every single one of those folders, even the new ones, have been given the Office folder template, we can say, get the information off the Office folder template for each one. So we'll select all, grab all of that. So clear the table, get all of our employee folders. For each folder, retrieve the field values off that. And then we just need to insert that data, just like we did before during the first one. Remember, insert data as a new row, update data is going to change an existing row. We'll call this add employee data. Data source, once again, is going to be LF external tables, and it's going to be the Office Lite table. Now we need to make sure we set our values. Now we don't want to do anything with the ID because that threw an error last time. So the retrieve field values for each row is going to, actually, let's do this, sorry. Where's retrieve? So yeah, retrieve field values for first name, and then last name. Department, position, and lastly, supervisor. So for each entry, retrieve field values, and then add employee data for each one. Now this is something that I've seen folks add it so, or set it up so it's going to run nightly. So you could do like a schedule. And if you don't have any experience or a lot of experience doing schedules, I'll just show you a quick example. I can type schedule rewrite table. Make sure you select scheduled. Next, start today. We would want to start it probably tonight though, like after business hours. So maybe just at 6 p.m. And you can have it repeat nightly. I always do daily, and then I hit the configure option and just say only run on weekdays. Like, we don't need you to do it every day. You'll also notice here that you have the option to do it every 2 days or every 3 days or what have you. And if you want to run it every several minutes or something, it seems like overkill, especially because I'm guessing a lot of your tables aren't only 19 records long. It's probably a lot more than that. So typically to run this overnight is best practice, and maybe only, depending on how often you need to update this, that could even be weekly. So that's how you would do that. The other option is, of course, to make this a business process and have it be run manually, which is also what I'm going to do. Is I'm just going to go ahead and run the current workflow manually, just to show you what that looks like. It might take it a little bit to run that. And actually, you know what might be better is let's go ahead and change this so that way we know that it's running correctly. I'm going to go ahead and delete the Steven Krutzfeldt folder, because as much as I would enjoy being on the Office, I don't know how entertaining it would be. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to run this a second time, and we're just going to run it and make sure that it rewrites the table without Steven Krutzfeldt in it. That way we've cleaned up our data, we made sure that our two sources of data are now synced, and our table is up to date. So let's hope this is done running. Let's just go ahead and run it again. I'm just hitting F5 to refresh this to see if when it's finished running, everything's green, all systems go. Back in here, and I'll go ahead and just re-execute this. Oh, that was my mistake. I just deleted everything. Let's try this again. What's awesome though is that since we deleted this, we also have the ability to go in and use a workflow to automatically just rewrite all that. So no harm, no foul. We just have to wait an extra 20 seconds. My mistake. You can hear all of your eyes rolling, and I don't blame you. All right, so obviously, let's go ahead and select our top 1,000 rows. You see everything is in fact here. We do not have anything for Stephen Krutzfeldt. I'm not sure why I added this additional piece here, but as you can see, we have all of our information, and that was written directly from the workflow based on the information that we had here, all of our different folders. So that is how you can do what we would call a data sync, if you will. So I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions, there are a lot of different opportunities or a lot of different resources out there. Laserfiche Answers is one of my favorites. Usually if you have a question about Laserfiche and you just Google it, the top 2 or 3 things that come up are going to be from Laserfiche Answers. You're probably not the first person to have that exact same question. So usually someone else has asked it on the public forum and it's been answered. So I get a lot of my information there. There's also the Solution Exchange here, as well as Cities Digital has our portal for our different documents. We have a lot of different documentation available. All of it's up to date. If you have trouble finding something, then by all means reach out to our team and we'll make sure that we can get you the correct documentation based on what you're looking for. If you fill out the survey afterwards, that will automatically register you to win this sweet CDI mug. So please fill that out. Like I said, we are always looking for new topics. We want to know how we can help you guys the best. What questions do you have? What are you running into on a daily basis? How can we best use this time to serve you? And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. I know we went a little bit longer than we normally do, but I can open it up for questions. So if any of you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them now. Please put them into the questions box in the little floating window. If not, then thank you everyone for your time. I hope you found this helpful. We should have this up on the YouTube channel within the next few days. I do want to finish with the caveat once again saying that this is just meant to be a introduction on how to use the right activities in workflow to the SQL database. There are of course many different ways to use this. So this is just one option. All right, so at the beginning I said that there's another webinar that we should also watch. Yes, and I'm going to see if I can drag this out and see the rest of it. See ellipses. Let me see if, so it was just last month's consulting webinar. It should be available on the CDI website, and maybe I can even bring that up quick. But ultimately it would be creating dynamic fields was the name of it, or at least that was the name of the topic, was creating dynamic fields in Laserfiche. I believe it's also available on the CDI website as well. So I did find it, and let's see if I can just put this in the chat. Yep, so I did pop that in the chat, and that will be last month's build along dynamic fields. So if you watch that, that'll actually show you how I created the drop downs to dynamic fields. It goes into a little bit more depth and actually using SQL and adding some of that information. So today's, like I said, is more of a follow-up on that of how you can maintain. But yeah, the two kind of go hand in hand. So please do check it out when you get a minute. Any other questions? All right, well, if there are no other questions, thank you everyone for your time today. Thanks for joining me. And by all means, if any questions do come up later, absolutely reach out to the team here at CDI. We always aim to be as helpful as possible. And if we don't know answers, we'll find them for you as quickly as possible. And join us for next month's webinar. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you then. Thank you.